Welcome to the 72nd episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today, we are here to discuss UFC 276. Israel Adesanya and Alexander Volkanovski were both able to retain their belts in the main event and co-main event. And once we are done with that, we are going to take a look at next week's fight card, which is headlined by Fiziev and Rafael dos Anjos. Now, we're going to get right into UFC 276 because there are a lot of fights that we need to talk about, and we are going to start right at the main event of Israel Adesanya versus Jared Cannonier. Now, this was a great performance by Israel Adesanya. He didn't really, he didn't land those big shots that were able to get Cannonier out of there, but he did a very good job at defensively. I don't think there were very many moments in that fight where I was ever concerned or thought that Israel Adesanya was going to lose. I thought he dropped the fourth round, but outside of that, he pretty clearly won the other 4 rounds. Jared Cannonier landed a handful of good shots, but for the most part, Israel stayed very defensively sound, and he was able to avoid a lot of those strikes. And then offensively, Israel did what he always does. He stayed on the outside, landed some really good jabs, landed a couple of straights. He didn't really get into too many exchanges in the pocket, and he wasn't very active, which are 2 things I would have liked to see a little bit more of. He threw quite a few head kicks. He didn't land anything flush with the head kicks. Jared Cannonier did a really good job defensively with those. And then he landed the leg kicks like he always does, which I think everyone was anticipating that he was going to do a good job landing those leg kicks, and he did. He also threw some good body shots in there. He has a really good kick to the body. He kicks the body very well. For Jared Cannonier, he did some of the things that I thought he needed to do to win. I thought he needed to get inside to the clinch, maybe some Muay Thai clinch, throw some shots on the inside, make it real dirty boxing, which he was able to do in that 4th round a little bit. And then I think it was either the 3rd or 5th round, I don't completely remember. He had a couple more scenarios in the clinch that he did well in, but that wasn't enough to win him the entirety of those rounds. He also did a decent job attacking to the body in comparison to Whitaker and Vettori. So I saw some things that I really liked from Jared Cannonier, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't really enough to get it done against Israel Adesanya. And he wasn't ever able to land, a big shot that really changed the trajectory of this fight. Now, I don't really think there is much else to talk about in that one in terms of the fight itself. And for Israel Adesanya, I think everyone knows what's next for Israel Adesanya. I think it's very clear that Alex Pereira is going to get that next title shot, and that is whether you believe he deserves it or whether you believe he doesn't deserve it. I think he's going to get it. For me, I don't hate it. I don't love it either. When you're looking at skill for skill in that division, I don't think that Alex Pereira is as complete of a martial artist or as good of a martial artist as guys like Whitaker, Cannonier, Vettori, Brunson, maybe not Brunson, Costa. But the thing that Pereira has is Pereira had a really good stylistic matchup. We're going to talk about that more in a little bit with Sean Strickland. But Alex Pereira is a very good stylistic matchup for Israel Adesanya in terms of if you're trying to carve someone out who has a chance against Izzy in the striking realm. Alex Pereira is the guy that you're going to create. So I'm not sure that he is as good as, like I said, like guys like Whitaker. But at the end of the day, Pereira really just has a few things that he can do. I shouldn't say a few things, but he has the right skills to beat Israel Adesanya, or at least challenge Israel Adesanya. So I think it is very clear that he's going to be next. And when you're looking at the remainder of that division, Israel Adesanya has beat 1 through 3. Strickland's at 4, so Pereira is going to move up to 4. He's already beat Brunson. He's already beat Costa. And then you're looking at Hermanson and Till. So for Israel Adesanya, I don't really know what else he could do. So I think it's very clear that Pereira is that next fight. And then for Cannonier, I think Cannonier versus, well, they're doing Whitaker versus Vittori. Um, Cannonier versus Strickland makes a level of sense. They're doing Costa versus Rockhold, so the winner of Costa versus Rockhold could be a potential matchup. Um, Derek Brunson versus, oh, I don't know. But I think that Cannonier versus Strickland makes a level of sense, but I would not be surprised if they don't make that fight. I think if Darren Till beats Jack Hermanson, or yeah, if Darren Till beats Jack Hermanson, Till versus Cannonier would be a good fight. Simply, Hermanson has kind of already fought some of those guys up there, so I think that's a potential fight to make in the future. But I don't think there is much going on right now at 185 pounds. So I think Cannonier versus Strickland right now is the fight to make. They're both, coming off losses, and they'll probably be looking at a similar window to return. Now, moving on to the co-main event, we had Alexander Volkanovski defeat Max Holloway. And this was a very, very dominant performance by Alexander Volkanovski. I'm not sure that I can say enough good things about his performance. He fought the perfect fight, right? He he does such a good job of he did such a great job of letting Max walk him down, and then from there, once Max was walking him down, Volkanovski was really landing with pinpoint accuracy, and he lands with a lot of power. And some of the angles that Volkanovski creates, I think that is probably the most underrated part of his game. Is he's so good at attacking from good angles, right? In angles where you don't necessarily see a punch coming. And if you combine that with his accuracy and power and cardio, it really creates a tough fighter to beat. And I think that hook that he landed on Max that cut Max on the eyebrow, I think that's a very good example of that. And he just, I feel like every time he landed in that fight, and you can go back to every other fight he's had, Korean Zombie being a great example, where it feels like every time he lands, you're like, oh man, it feels like every shot that he lands it just hurts guys. And when I say hurts guys, it's not like guys are out there doing the chicken dance every time he lands. It's not like guys are getting their lights put out, but it looks like they physically get hurt, right? That's how people end up with such busted up faces. Is he just hits hard. I listened to, I think it was Chael Sonnen talk about this once, where when he fought Vanderlei Silva, Vanderlei, when you were hit by him, his lights didn't go out, but it physically just hurt your face. And I think that is the type of thing that the type of power that Volkanovski has, and that's why you see someone like Max Holloway not throw as many shots, because Max Holloway really, I would have liked to see him weaponize his pace, but Volkanovski does a really good job of punishing you when you enter. And when you're getting hit that hard every time you enter, you're not going to want to continuously enter, continuously try and weaponize your pace when you are continuously punished for that. So I think that, like I said earlier, when you combine the raw power, when you combine the speed, when you combine the accuracy, it is really, Volkanovski becomes a really tough guy to beat. And we haven't even mentioned his fight IQ yet, because he has a tremendous fight IQ. This fight, I'm not sure that the fight IQ is on display as much. That second fight is when the fight IQ is really on display, when he was able to make that mid-fight adjustment and pull away in the later rounds. This fight, he kind of controlled it more, front to back, so I don't think there was as much fight IQ on display because he was in control for such a long period of time. But that is one of his best skills, is his fight IQ. So physically and mentally, Volkanovski is a very tough guy to beat. And we haven't even mentioned his leg kicks yet. I mean, his leg kicks really changed fights. And I didn't realize how many leg kicks he landed in the first two Max Holloway fights. I don't think he landed as many in this one. He didn't really need to. But in the first two, I think he landed 75 in the first one and 67 in the second one. So I think those are two of the most ridiculous performances in terms of quantity of leg kicks. So right now for Alexander Volkanovski, I think it is far and widely known that he is the best fighter in that division by a mile. I think a lot of people, when they watched this fight, they looked at Max's performance and said Max was a step slower. Max was, looks like he has regressed a little bit, and I'm not sure that those things are true. I just think that when you put him in there with someone like Volkanovski, he does that. He brings that. He Volkanovski looks so much better. Where instead of giving credit to Volkanovski, people try and tear down Max Holloway for not looking as good. I don't necessarily think that is the case. I think Volkanovski just looks so good in there that it feels like the guy he's fighting is a step behind. When in reality, Max is where he needed to be. Max could have beat anyone else in that division probably. From entering, if okay, let me say this: if Max was in there with anyone else in that division last night, there's a good chance he wins. But Volkanovski is just that much better than the rest of the division. When you look at that fight with the Korean Zombie, he was miles ahead of the Korean Zombie. He was miles ahead of Brian Ortega. Difference being Brian Ortega was able to put Volkanovski in some bad positions, but in the large scheme of that fight, Volkanovski was the much better fighter. Aside from those handful of positions that Ortega won by a wide margin. And then in terms of his next performance, I think if Volkanovski is able to go out there and do, something that dominant to a fighter like Yair Rodriguez, I think that would just kind of solidify that fact. I'm not sure that Yair Rodriguez is going to be the next fight, but we will talk about that in a second. But in terms of Alexander Volkanovski, I think it is pretty safe to say, that Alexander Volkanovski is the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Listen, I think Kamaru Usman's great. I think Israel Adesanya is great. I think Charles Oliveira is great. I think a lot of those guys are great. But I don't think there's anyone right now on the level of Alexander Volkanovski. If you look at each of those divisions and go, okay, who can beat Usman and how can they do it? You could work your way into, talks and you could kind of rationale as to how someone could beat Usman. I really don't know how someone at 145 pounds can beat Alexander Volkanovski. I think there are guys at 155 pounds that could possibly beat him. However, with that being said, those guys will have very large size advantages. Specifically, if you're looking at someone like Islam Makhachev, if you think Islam Makhachev can go out there and out-wrestle Alexander Volkanovski for 5 rounds, Makhachev would have a massive, massive size advantage. So that wouldn't be really, that wouldn't affect his pound-for-pound status per se. Now, with that, kind of being set, and actually, let me go back to that. When you look at skills as well, when you look at these skills of Alexander Volkanovski, he is one of the best strikers in the world. You can make the case that he is the best striker in the world, and not only that, but he also has very good wrestling. So if you're looking at like skills and listing off skills that these guys have, you can make the case that Volkanovski is the most skilled fighter. And if you are the most skilled fighter, I think that makes you the best fighter, pound for pound. Now, what is next for Alexander Volkanovski? I think that a lightweight title fight is very likely. It's tough to say because I don't know what's going to happen right now at 155 pounds. The talks of Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev are obviously there. Recently, we have seen some twists and turns with Charles saying he wants to fight Conor. If you do Charles and Conor and then you do Chandler versus Islam for the belt, that, doesn't really make much sense in my eyes, but I think it is a possibility. But from there, we'll just go with the with the more likely outcome of Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. If that fight happens, I think a fight with Volkanovski against a winner would make a lot of sense. But if the only really factor that can change this, I believe, is Yair Rodriguez. I do not think that Josh Emmett has really done enough to cement himself and really convince me or anyone else that Josh Emmett can go out there and beat Alexander Volkanovski. And when you're looking at someone like Yair Rodriguez, if Yair Rodriguez is able to go out there and put a stamp on Brian Ortega, if Yair Rodriguez finishes Brian Ortega, I think you can make a solid argument that Yair Rodriguez deserves that shot against Alexander Volkanovski. But if Brian Ortega goes out there and wins, I really have a tough time making an argument for an Ortega rematch or a Josh Emmett fight. I think if Ortega were to win, you could do Ortega versus Emmett for the number one contender. Will Volkanovski goes up to 155 pounds and fights for the belt. And I really do believe that Volkanovski would be able to, based off how much he's cleaned out this 145-pound division, I think it would be smart to go up to 155 pounds. And if you can rule at 145 pounds and 155 pounds simultaneously and keep both of those divisions active, that would be one of the greatest things that any fighter has ever done in this sport. And I think there's a chance that if anyone can do it, Volkanovski can do it. And just looking at the names at 155 pounds, if Volkanovski is able to go out there and add a name like Charles Oliveira or Islam Makhachev to his resume, if he's able to go out there and beat a Conor McGregor, I'm not necessarily sure that Conor gets a title shot soon, but if he beats a Conor McGregor, if he beats a Poirier, a Gaethje, a Chandler, if he can get 2 or 3 of those names on his resume, it would really, in my opinion, put him very, very close to the top. And I really do believe that there's a very possible outcome here that in 2 years we're calling Alexander Volkanovski the greatest of all time if he's able to do those things. I mean, if you're comparing resumes, this 5-fight streak that he has gone on, or you can even extend it to 6, if you're looking at this 6-fight win streak, Mendez, Aldo, Holloway, Ortega, Korean Zombie, Holloway. That is a ridiculous streak. And if you were able to tack on names, like I said, just for argument's sake, we'll say he goes Oliveira, Makhachev, Poirier, Yair, Emmett, say those are his next 5 fights or so. However, you could even say just 3 of those 5 names. He would have an all-time great resume and an all-time great win streak on his hands that would be very hard to ignore, and simultaneously ruling that 145 and 155 pound division at the same time would be one of the greatest accomplishments that we have ever seen in this sport. And I think it's a very scary thing to even think of, but at this point I think it is possible. And I really don't have much more to say for Volkanovski. I think I've made my point that, maybe we can get a Yair title shot at 145 next, depending on how the cards fall. But I really do like him versus Charles Oliveira at 155 pounds for that vacant strap. And if he does decide to fight Yair, if he beats Yair, then he can go to 155. But I think that 155 pounds makes a lot of sense for Alexander Volkanovski. Now, for Max Holloway is in an absolutely terrible position. When I look at Max Holloway and I go, okay, what's next for Max, right? In any other scenario, the answer would be go up to 155 pounds, right? Or go up a division. If Cannonier were to lose 2 more times to Israel Adesanya or another time to Israel Adesanya and beat everyone else, I think there'd be a lot of talk about him going to light heavyweight. If Covington, loses again to Usman, I think there would be a lot of talk of him, maybe dropping down to lightweight or going up to middleweight. I think there would be a lot of those types of discussions. If depending on how Figueiredo and Moreno pans out, one of those guys could move to 135. I think that is the obvious answer here. However, for Max Holloway, if Alexander Volkanovski is able to, if Volkanovski is able to rule at 145 and 155 pounds, that is a scary proposition for Max Holloway, because now you're looking at, okay, there's this one guy, I fought him 3 times. The best I've gotten is a split decision loss that many people think I won, but I have nothing to show for it on my career record. I took 3 losses at the end of the day. And if Volkanovski goes up to lightweight and Max Holloway earns a lightweight title shot and Volkanovski's a champion at lightweight, it's like, oh man, here we go again. Right? And now we have 2 divisions having the same issue. But with that being said, I think that 155 pounds may simply make more sense. Because if you're Max Holloway, you've done everything you can do at 145. If you weren't able to beat him one of these 3 times at 145 pounds, I'm not sure that is the best place for you. And I think that if Max Holloway were to be at 155 pounds and be a little bit bigger and have a little bit more power, I think that he probably would have a better shot against Volkanovski if he was physically stronger, right? I think you could catch Volkanovski in this position where I'm at 145 pounds, I'm at 155 pounds, but I'm going back and forth between the two, and I have to be ready to make 145. If Holloway just commits fully to 155 pounds, I think there is a possibility that he would be able to have a better outcome against Volkanovski, if that makes sense. Just because I feel like I feel like Holloway has more of a frame to fill out than Volkanovski. I don't think Volkanovski is going to get he's not going to get physically bigger. I think Max Holloway, on the other hand, could add 10 pounds of muscle, and that may be able to help them and bridge maybe a power gap that we saw last night, and bridge, the physical strength that we saw in some clinch scenarios that maybe Max could come out on top of next time. So I think that those are some thoughts that maybe he would have a better chance at 155 pounds if he fully commits. But you can make the case for Holloway that that's the move to make anyways. Because if I were Max Holloway, these fights that coming up, you could fight these up-and-comers at 145 like Arnold Allen, Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett isn't really an up-and-comer, but in terms of coming into title contention, you would be looking at fights against Emmett, Allen, maybe a Korean Zombie, Chikadze, Bryce Mitchell, Movsar Evelev, or you can go to 155 and fight Dustin again, maybe a Gaethje, a Chandler. I think those are the type of fights that they would probably give Max Holloway. I'm not sure that they give Max an Islam Makhachev or Beneil Dariush. Maybe they give him a Tony Ferguson. Maybe they give him Conor McGregor. Maybe they give him Dan Hooker. So I just think that for Max Holloway, there's higher upside at 155 pounds. So I think that's the move you make. I think you commit yourself to putting on 10 pounds of muscle and going to 155 pounds and seeing what you can do. It's better than staying at 145 and being the gatekeeper to the belt and having to fight 3 of these top guys. And all you're doing is cementing your legacy as the second best featherweight of this generation. When at 155, you could at least, find some fresh blood. I mean, he's already fought Poirier, but other than that, find some fresh blood. And I guess he's already fought Oliveira, but still, you get the point I'm making. It wouldn't be easy. Whatever Max Holloway chooses to do at 145 or 155, it will not be easy. I can guarantee you that it's going to be very difficult. But even with his age at age 30, I don't think he's done. I just think that I think that he could have more longevity at 155 pounds, especially if he fills out that frame a little bit and gets a little bit thicker. I think that would be a beneficial outcome. And I did kind of ramble there a little bit, so I'm sorry for that. But I just think there are so many ifs and buts when you're talking about Volkanovski and Holloway. because there are so many different ways this can go. If Volkanovski never goes up to 155 pounds, Max Holloway's career at 155 would look much different. However, if Volkanovski's a double champ between the two divisions, then 155 looks a lot more grim for Holloway. So I think there are a lot of buts and ifs and a lot of bases to cover. So I hope that made sense while I was trying to cover all these bases for these two guys and their immediate futures, because rarely do we see two guys fight and then the talk be, all right, they're both moving up to 155 or they're both jumping up a division. So it could have got a little confusing there, and I'm sorry if it did. Moving on to a much simpler situation, Alex Pereira versus Sean Strickland. And in this fight, we saw Alex Pereira land that counter hook that he has that is just absolutely devastating. Put Sean Strickland out cold. Not out cold, but almost out cold. He was 75%, 80% of the way out. Great stoppage by Herzog. He was laying on his back. There was nothing he was going to do. Every punch after that was just going to be an explanation point. Now, for Pereira, he did a really good job in this fight, because if you're Pereira, you don't really know what you're going to get right away. You don't know if you're going to have Sean Strickland shooting for takedowns, looking to grapple you right away. So I think once it became evident that, okay, Sean Strickland's going to be out here, and he's looking to strike with me, he's looking to throw a little bit, he's looking to walk me down. So we figured out what Sean Strickland's game plan was looking like over a couple minutes, and then he capitalized. Once he learned what the game plan was, he found an opening and capitalized on it right away. I think that was a tremendous performance by Alex Pereira. Sean Strickland, I believe we talked about this in the preview, but Sean Strickland, the question was, is he going to be willing to go out there and shoot for a takedown, or is he going to want to stand and trade with Pereira? I was on the team of I think he's going to stand and trade, and it's not going to work out well for him. I thought there was a path to victory for him by decision. I thought he was going to be a little bit more competitive standing and trading with Pereira, but still, he went out there, looked to take the dangerous route, and he got a dangerous outcome. So for Sean Strickland, he's not in the great position and didn't come in with the best game plan, but Pereira was the one who really put a stamp out there, so credit to Pereira. Now, for Pereira, I talked a little bit about it earlier, but Izzy is the next fight for him. I just don't think that there's any argument to be made. I think that's the fight to be made. I think the UFC wants it. If the UFC didn't want to see Alex Pereira versus Sean Strickland, they would have booked him against someone in that 10 to 15 spot in the rankings, right? He wouldn't have gotten a free pass to number 4 in the rankings as an unranked fighter if the UFC didn't want him there, right? If the UFC wanted him not to fight Izzy, he would have gotten stuck with, Andre Muniz or Nasruddin Imavov or Calvin Gastelum first or Jack Hermanson first. And then he would have had to fight a Sean Strickland, a Derek Brunson, a Marvin Vettori, a Jared Cannonier. They would have made him really fight his way through those rankings if they didn't want him in there. Instead, he got right up to number 4, Sean Strickland, who you can make a very good argument that is the best stylistic matchup for him at 185 pounds in the top 15. And specifically, if you're looking at the top 5, Whitaker going to go out there and grapple him. Vettori going to go out there and grapple him. Brunson going to go out there and grapple him. I know Whitaker isn't grappler first, but he's smart enough to know I'm not going to go out there and stand and trade with this guy. Whitaker would have grappled him. Cannonier probably would have fought a similar fight to the way he fought Izzy. But that still would have been more competitive than someone like Sean Strickland. Hermanson would have grappled him if you want to go further. Paulo Costa would have at least had a better shot to put him out of there due to pure power. Darren Till possibly could have done something from a technical kickboxing standpoint because that is his forte, but I still think Pereira wins that fight probably. So really, if you're looking at this division, you would scroll through and go, okay, Sean Strickland. So they want him to fight Izzy. He's going to fight Izzy. He did what he needed to do, and I don't think there's much more to it than that. We talked about it earlier with Strickland. I think Strickland versus Cannonier makes sense. There's a couple other fights. Till versus Hermanson. Once again, if Till gets a win, maybe they give him someone up there. I think there are some options. If Paulo Costa gets a win, I think there's some other things that can happen in that division. but I think that Strickland versus Cannonier is a good first fight to make. If not, you're looking at a Hermansson, a Till, who he's already fought Hermansson, Acosta. So it's the same old guys at 185 pounds. Nothing too crazy going on there. Now, moving on, Brian Barberena versus Robbie Lawler. I cannot believe Brian Barberena won this fight. Not any disrespect to Barberena. Coming in, I thought it was going to be very competitive. After the first round, I was like, wow, Robbie Lawler landed a lot of really good shots. He's looking good. I think he's going to win this fight. Round 2, Robbie Lawler starts to pull ahead even more in my mind as Barberena's volume declines. And then in round 2, we see Barberena land a really good shot, and we see Robbie Lawler, who's visibly hurt, and Brian Barberena just pours it on from there. He just pours it on. Once he had Robbie Lawler in deep waters, he kept him out there, and he kept taking him deeper, and eventually that got him the stoppage. That is a very, very good fight from Brian Barberena, and it was not easy for him at all. I'm not sure that for Barberena next, I'm not sure what they're going to do with him. I don't necessarily think he gets a ranked fight at 175 pounds or 170 pounds, excuse me. I think you could make a case for it. I think Pereira versus Brian Barberena would be a fun fight from an entertainment standpoint, but I'm not sure that is the route they go. I think a fight like Daniel Rodriguez would be a fun fight. I think a Santiago Ponzinibbio would be a fun fight. I think a Jake Matthews would be a fun fight. A Nico Price, possibly. So ultimately, I think he gets someone who is just outside of those rankings at 170, but I don't see him getting a ranked opponent next. For Robbie Lawler, I'm even more interested to see what they do with him because he's not done yet, I don't think. He showed a lot of things that you'd like, and I thought he was fighting a very good fight up until it wasn't going his way anymore. So I think for Robbie, I think he probably stays in that same range of, I'm not fighting a ranked opponent, but I'll get some fights that will probably be a fun fight, whether that be a Matt Brown. A Matt Brown fight would make a level of sense at this stage in both of their careers. A Tim Means fight, possibly. So some fights like that I think are possible options for Robbie Lawler. Moving on to Sean O'Malley and Pedro Munhoz. We saw this fight end in a no contest due to an incidental eye poke. And up until the eye poke, it wasn't really the greatest fight you've ever seen. And I don't really know which direction that fight was going to go. I think Sean was landing a lot of the better strikes to the head, but the inactivity wasn't very good, and he wasn't landing very frequently. I thought he was going to be able to land on Pedro a lot more frequently. Now, for Pedro, he didn't land a single punch to the head in the first round, I don't believe. I might be wrong on that. From what I saw, he didn't land a single punch to the head in the first round, but he landed a lot of leg kicks, and we saw judges give him the first round without landing a single punch to the head. I'm not really sure how I feel about that because Sean didn't really land too many punches to the head either. So I'm not sure how that fight goes if it goes 3 rounds. Eye pokes happen. It was very incidental. I mean, he didn't even get... That's one of those things where he didn't really get hit in the eye that bad, but it has a bad outcome. It could have been a nail maybe that glanced on the eyeball. It could have been a number of things. But we saw, it wasn't like Sean was out there poking him in the eye as hard as he could. It was very incidental. So I'm interested to see what they do next. I wouldn't be surprised if they rebook that fight, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they don't. Sean O'Malley versus, there isn't really much for Sean O'Malley in all honesty if you don't do Pedro, because when this fight was booked, it was booked on the logic of, hey, we're going to see a lot of outcomes, right? It was booked as Sean O'Malley versus Pedro Munhoz. We're going to see the outcome to that fight. And then in the next couple months, we're going to see Sandhagen versus Song Yadong. We're going to see Dominic Cruz versus Chito Vera. We're going to see a handful of these fights. play out. We're going to see Murad versus Aldo. We're seeing Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. We're seeing a lot of these fights. And then Sean was going to get booked with someone coming off a win, or maybe a big name coming off a loss was going to be the next move for Sean. But right now you're sitting here going, well, he's not really going to move up in the rankings based off what we saw. And right now a lot of these guys are booked. So depending on how long Pedro takes to recover, maybe they rebook Pedro. Maybe they go Rob Font. I don't think Rob Font is booked. I don't think you throw Sean in there with another prospect like a Adrian Yanez, like an Umar Nurmagomedov, like a Jack Shore. I don't think that makes sense because I think all of those guys will be in the top 5 eventually. So I think you hold off on those fights until they're all closer to that top 5, top 10 range. In terms of one sleeper fight, maybe we see Cody Garbrandt. If Pedro Munhoz, takes a while to return, maybe they say, oh, we'll give him a former champion. It wouldn't be a ranked win, but I think a win over Cody Garbrandt would be a good thing, and they could market that a little bit. So maybe that's a potential fight, but Sean O'Malley isn't in the best of spots. And in all honesty, I don't think we see a fight booked for him for a couple months here, right? It's not going to be anytime soon. There are no rush with Sean. They're going to wait and see how that division plays out. Moving on, we had Jalen Turner go out there and finish Brad Riddell in 45 seconds. Absolutely ridiculous performance from Jalen Turner. He's so big in that division, right? He goes out there and he lands a big shot, hurts Brad Riddell, and gets in a mounted guillotine very quickly. That's high level grappling, very patient grappling. He really went out there and was able to make Brad Riddell hurt. He hurt Brad Riddell, and then from there he did a very good job of capitalizing on that. So credit to Jalen Turner. For Jalen Turner, I think that he is going to get a big time opportunity here next. He's probably going to be ranked number 14. I think one fight that makes sense is Dan Hooker. I think Dan Hooker versus Jalen Turner is a fun fight. From there, if they don't make that fight, I think you could do Arman Sarukian versus Jalen Turner. That would be a good fight for Arman because it's another young guy, and you're not seeing Arman slide too far, and we're not seeing him fight an unranked guy, but we are seeing him fight someone who is ranked and respected, so I think that would also make sense. Jim Miller versus Donald Cerrone. Really just a simple outcome here. We saw two guys throw kicks at the same time. Donald Cerrone was the one that slipped, even though his kick actually landed better, but he slipped, and then Jim Miller pounced on that neck and got that finish. Great performance by Jim Miller, and he was able to go out there and become the UFC leader in all-time wins. Now, for Donald Cerrone, this obviously wasn't the best outcome, but he did retire from the sport. And I think that is a very good time for Donald Cerrone to retire, right? He gave it one last ride. He said it himself. He gave it one last ride in Las Vegas in a stacked and crowded arena on a stacked pay-per-view. I think that was the card. I think that was the time. So I think he got out of there at a good time for Donald Cerrone. So credit to him. And Donald Cerrone is actually starring in 2 movies that are supposed to come out, one in 2022 and one in 2023. I don't know if those have official release dates, but those are the expected release dates. I was looking yesterday. So Donald Cerrone is not kidding when he said he wants to be a UFC superstar. Excuse me, a movie superstar, a movie star. So look out for him in movies. But the other thing he said in his post-fight was that he wants to be a UFC Hall of Famer, and I think he has done enough to be a UFC Hall of Famer. Now, the next fight on this card, we had top prospect Ian Machado Gary, formerly known as Ian Gary, now Ian Machado Gary. He went out there and beat Gabe Green. He wasn't able to get a finish, but I wasn't too surprised at that just because Gabe Green is so durable. But he did go out there and land a lot of heavy shots, a lot of good shots. He had Gabe Green hurt. I think he did a lot of really good work out there. I'm higher on Ian Gary than I was previously. I still would like to see him get hit a little bit less, but he showed a lot of good things offensively, pinpoint accuracy, some good power. He still has good judo. Ian Gary is a real threat in this division, and I'm a lot higher on him today than I was 3 days ago. So for Ian Gary, I don't think he's a ranked fighter yet. I think you need to beat someone of a higher status before you get to that level. If you look at Shavkat Rakhmonov, he took out a couple guys who were better than Gabe Green before he got a shot in those rankings. So I think we are going to see a step up in competition for Ian Gary. At welterweight, I think there are a lot of options. I don't think we see him going out there and fighting someone on the outer edge of the rankings, right? I don't think we see him fighting someone from that 15 to 20, 25 range. I think it's going to be a little bit closer to that 30 to 40 range, but I think he will get a legit name in his next fight. Looking at some possibilities, I think maybe Razam Emeev is a direction they'd want to go. Give him another prospect. Maybe you take him a similar route to Shavkat Rakhmonov and give him Carlston Harris. Maybe a Trevin Giles. He's booked, but that's a possibility. Warley Alvarez, who hasn't fought in a while, that's a possibility. Maybe you want to give him someone like Matt Brown if you want to try and build a name a little bit. A Danny Roberts possibly. So I think that's the level of fighter that we're going to see here. I think we're going to see a step up in name recognition and skill moving forward for Ian Green. And that's no disrespect to Gabe Green. I think Gabe Green's a really good fighter, but I just don't think he's on the level of some of those guys that I previously mentioned. And moving down, we only have 4 more fights to talk about. We're not making quick work, though. That's all right. Dricus Du Plessis and Brad Tavares went to war in this one. I was very surprised that Dricus Du Plessis won this fight after watching that first round. I thought that first round solidified the fact that Brad Tavares was going to walk away with this. However, he did not. So credit to Dricus Du Plessis for really turning it around in that one. I was very impressed. I do have some flaw. I did see some flaws in his performance, and I think he does have some issues. I think he's a little bit available to get countered, and I don't know that he has as high of a ceiling at 185 pounds as people will like to say. But I think that he will be, he's going to be in the rankings here soon. And I think that he is a very, very good fighter. Now, in terms of what is next for Dricus Du Plessis, I think that Kelvin Gastelum fight makes a level of sense. Brad Tavares was 12th in the rankings, so I don't think it's too much to ask to get a fight over the number 10 guy in the rankings. I think that fight makes a level of sense. Now, moving on, we had Andre Muniz went out there and beat Uriah Hall. Very good performance from Andre Muniz. I really liked that. Controlled a lot of position. Looked good on the feet, too. He wasn't just a grappler. He did some good things on the feet that I liked. He throws really good kicks. On the ground, he was chasing submissions, but Uriah Hall has some really good submission defense, so he wasn't able to land that submission, but he controlled that fight, and I don't think there was a question that he was going to win that once he started landing takedowns. So very good performance from Andre Muniz. I think there are 2 fights for Muniz moving forward that I like. I think if Jack Hermanson loses, I think Hermanson versus Muniz makes sense. And I think that Andre Muniz versus Derek Brunson would be a cool grappling match that would make a level of sense. For Uriah Hall, I think he gets someone. They might throw a top prospect his way that's breaking into those rankings at 185, or maybe they do something like Brad Tavares or Edmund Shabazian, guys who are already ranked but are not as good as someone like Andre Muniz. Macy Barber versus Jessica Ai. Macy Barber had a really good performance, and I liked what she did in there. She landed a lot of really good shots in the clinch. I like that. I liked the way that she fought that fight. I think it was very clear that she had a big power advantage. She just got out controlled a little bit in some positions, but at her age, I'm not too concerned about that. I think those are things that she will improve upon moving forward. But I did really, really like her performance. Like I said, she landed a lot of really good shots, but there are some things she needs to patch up. But at 24 years old, like I said already, not too concerned. Casey O'Neill said she wanted to fight Macy Barber. I think that's a silly idea. I think that you don't book two of your top prospects in a division, especially in this women's flyweight division. There are so many veterans that are available for Casey O'Neill and Macy Barber and Aaron Blanchfield and Tracy Cortez. I don't think we need to go out there and start pairing them up all together at the same time. I know Barber and Blanchfield already fought, but I don't think we need to keep doing things like that. I think Cynthia Calvillo makes sense. Andrea Lee, Jennifer Maia. Those are all fights that make sense. And I think that is the direction they probably go next. And the first fight of the night, Julia Stolarenko got a nice submission win over Jessica Rose Clark. Jessica Rose Clark is in a bad spot and may be released. So watch out for that. Julia Stolarenko is also in a bad spot, but I don't think she gets released. But I do think she just keeps fighting unranked competition at that women's 135-pound division. Now, overall thoughts on the card, that was a very, very, very good card. I think, the fights themselves are a little bit underwhelming, but name value, it was great. A lot of impactful fights in a lot of divisions. So that's all I really ask for, is that fights really matter. And it felt like there was something on the line in all those fights. Even the unranked fights like Ian Gary versus Gabe Green, you've got a top prospect in there. And like I said, from an entertainment value, there weren't really a lot of finishes. Muniz wasn't able to get a sub. Dricus Duplessis and Brett Tavares went to absolute war. That was a great fight. Izzy didn't really get a finish, like a lot of people thought he would. Volkanovski really just stunned on Holloway. That wasn't a very competitive fight. O'Malley and Moonhouse didn't really have the pop that you would have liked to see. But Pereira did a really good job getting a knockout. Even though there weren't a lot of finishes, like I said, all I ask is for fights to be impactful and mean something, and these fights did. So a lot of credit in that aspect. Now we're going to move forward and do a brief preview for UFC Fight Night, Rafael dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev. Like I said, this is going to be quick. I haven't done a lot of big-time research in what is actually, I'm actually seeing this card for the first time. I've been very focused on UFC 276. I was really put all my chips on that table. So, don't burn me over this one. Like I said, it's going to be a very quick discussion. Also, make sure, if you haven't already, go and watch my film study on Israel Adesanya. I will link that in the description again, but make sure you go and watch that. In the main event, Rafael dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev. I'm very interested to see how this fight plays out. I think Rafael dos Anjos has really been improving as of late, but I really like Fiziev as a fighter and as a prospect at lightweight. And I'm interested to see the game plans here. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the fight that we saw RDA fight against Felder, where he looked to have a lot of control time up against the fence. Question being, will that be valued as much now? We've heard on the commentary, and we've seen, that position hasn't really been rewarded very much. So, but I think in these striking exchanges, we're going to have a clear Rafael Fiziev advantage, and in the grappling exchanges, we'll have a clear RDA advantage. The question is, RDA is a very good striker in his own right. How much is he going to want to strike in there, and how much success will he have in there if he decides to strike? I think those are the two questions, and I'm very split 50-50 on this one, but I'm going to lean RDA just because he has more ways to get it done. I may change my mind before fight day, but that's just the way I lean right now. In the co-main, we have Kai Borrello versus Armen Petrosyan. These are two really good prospects at middleweight. This is a very impactful fight. I really like Kai Borrello. I think that he does a lot of very, very good things. So I'm going to lean in his direction. And like I said, these are two top prospects. So whoever wins this fight, I think you can really look out for in the future. Said Nurmagomedov versus Douglas Silva Andrade. Said is a very good fighter. So is Douglas Silva Andrade. If you pull up Silva Andrade's record, he is 28-4. Losses to Lerone Murphy, Piotr Yan, Rob Font, and Zubir Turkagov. Butchered that name, but that'll happen sometimes. So he has losses, but only to UFC caliber fighters and elite UFC fighters. Wins over guys like Chito Vera and Sergey Morozov. So he has some good wins on his record too. So this is no walk in the park for Said Nurmagomedov, but ultimately Said Nurmagomedov is a very good fighter, and I really like him. His win over Cody Stamann is very meaningful to me, so I will take Said in that one. And then we'll see Jamie Pickett versus Dennis Tayulin. We're going to start going quicker on these because Dennis Tayulin is 0-1 in the UFC, and I don't really know much about him in all honesty. I don't know why he's so high on this card. Jamie Pickett is not the best UFC fighter, but he is good enough. So that should be an interesting fight. Jared Vanderaa versus Chase Sherman's on this card. That's a heavyweight fight. That's okay. Then we have Michael Johnson and Jamie Mullarkey. This fight should be higher on the card. And I really like that fight. That one has fight of the night potential. Those are two really good strikers. I'm interested to see that. Cynthia Calvillo versus Nina Nunes. What division is this fight? I don't know. I don't even know what division this fight's taking place in. I wish it would say. Oh well. Somebody's going up a division and someone's going down a division. So I couldn't tell you. Neither of these fighters have looked great recently, so we'll see who's able to get it back on track. Ultimate Fighter winner Ricky Tercios is fighting Ayman Zahabib. That fight is going to be very good, so watch that one. Antonia Shevchenko versus Courtney Casey. I don't really know much about Courtney Casey other than that she's 10-9, and Antonia Shevchenko is 9-4, sister of Valentina Shevchenko, but she does have some good wins in the UFC. And then we have another really good fight here, Cody Brundage versus Tresean Gore. Tresean Gore is someone I really like, but the Ultimate Fighter didn't go his way, which is fine, but I'm still really high on him, and I think he is a good striker. He just wasn't able to get it done against Brian Battle. And then Cody Brundage has had a weird UFC run where he lost on the Contender Series to William Knight, who is now fighting at light heavyweight. And then he loses to Nick, and then he goes back regionally, gets a UFC call, loses to Nick Maximov, and then beats Dalsha Lujimbala. So very interesting fight. This fight's there because Nick Maximov is someone who I personally like. I think he's a very good fighter. No shame in that loss. And then his win over Dalsha is a very good win because I like him as a fighter as well. And so I'm interested to see which version of him we get. Then we get Kennedy Indechinakucho versus Kyle Robertson. Two guys who are very well known. Kennedy gets a lot of credit for getting in some really fun fights. Robertson is 9-5, but he has fought some tough competition. I believe he's fought Vittori. Yeah. Tough competition for Carl Robertson. Carl Robertson is 9-5, right? But he came in the UFC. How many UFC wins does he have? He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights in the UFC already. So a lot of UFC experience. Good wins over Ryan Spann, Darren Stewart, Jack Marshman, Wellington Turman, and Roman Kopalov. Losses, no shame in some of these losses. Glover Teixeira, Brendan Allen, Marvin Vittori, Khalil Rountree. tough competition that he has fought. So that should be interesting. And first fight on the card is Sayokub Karanavov versus Ronnie Lawrence. Two bantamweights with some pretty good records there. That should also be an interesting fight. Now, obviously, like I said, I didn't do much research for UFC Fight Night. Dos Anjos versus Fiziev. That's what happens when we're coming after a big UFC pay-per-view. But just a brief little overview of who we've got on that card. But I hope you liked the recap for UFC 276. We were kind of all over the place at times, but it was a lot of interesting stuff there to talk about. But make sure you go follow the Headkick KO podcast on Twitter, and make sure you go and watch my film study on Israel Adesanya. I will link those two things in the description, so make sure you go and do that for me. That would be greatly appreciated. But regardless, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Headkick KO podcast. Goodbye.
Oh! He front kicked him in the face! Kevin Lee with the ultimate